What's happening, Packer fans? Happy Tuesday. Welcome into the Pack a Day podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. Going to be going over some players who I went back and took a look at. And of course, for those of you who don't know, during the last handful of seasons, I've graded every single player on every single play and obviously accumulated those stats and was able to kind of go through some trending. And today I wanted to take a look at a handful plus, of guys that really finished the season strong last year. And hopefully that means that they were starting to kind of come into their own and can hopefully carry that over into 2021. So I'll take a look at that in just a moment. But before we get there, I wanted to go through some injury notes from Packers practice on Monday. It was a very short indoor practice. I was not actually able to attend it. I will be at today's Tuesday practice. But there were some injury notes that came out. Matt Schneidman from The Athletic tweeted out that these were the players that were part of the rehab group. So, kind of doing a little bit of rehab and some running and maybe some soft drills off to the side. This would be David Bakhtiari, Aaron Jones, Darius Smith, Kenny Clark, Rashawn Gary, Kevin King, Kamal Martin, Equanimous St. Brown, Kingsley Keke, Will Redmond, Juwan Winfrey, Isaiah McDuffie, and Chris Blair. Randy Ramsey was not seen, which means he probably, again, as kind of expected at this point, has a more significant injury. And Dominique Daphne was back and practicing. So that was the one piece of good news, is that Dominique Daphne did return. And but more importantly, a lot of players that are starting to get some of those, bumps and bruises from training camp. So we'll want to definitely keep an eye on that. The good news is for some of these players, or a lot of these players, whether it's David Bakhtiari, Aaron Jones, Z, Kenny Clark, Rashawn Gary, Kevin King, I guess those would probably be the main ones, right? Like, those guys don't need a ton of snaps to get ready. As soon as they're healthy, they're going to be able to go out and play at a relatively high level, or at least at their normal level. What they get out of training camp isn't going to be all that much. For other guys, Kamal Martin, EQ especially, Will Redmond, Kingsley Keke, Winfrey, McDuffie, Blair, like, those are guys who need the practice reps. So hopefully they are able to get back sooner rather than later. But either way, at any time, whether it's during the season or in the off season, whatever, I always kind of try to think about it in the way of, like, all right, let's just assume that the players who were not practicing today couldn't play this Sunday, which of course is, I'm sure, probably not the case. But if there was a game on Sunday and these were the players who couldn't play, how would you be able to line up? And obviously right now, no Aaron Jones at running back would be a major problem. No Bakhtiari at left tackle. Zadarius Smith, Rashawn Gary, both missing at edge rusher, and Randy Ramsey, they'd be really beat up at edge rusher. Kenny Clark, being out. Imagine Z, Clark, and Gary all being out, which would just nuke any sort of pass rush ability. Kevin King, your likely starting corner. So they would be hurting, to say the least, if this were an actual game day and these were the players who couldn't practice or couldn't play. But hopefully nothing serious. Outside of Randy Ramsey, we haven't heard of any serious injuries up until this point, knock on wood, so hopefully that remains the case. But again, it is starting to pile up a little bit with the amount of players who are not practicing as of right now. We'll see if that changes, hopefully in the positive direction for Tuesday. All right, let's kick off the main topic today. And again, these are players that when I went back and looked at my numbers, really started trending in the right direction towards the end of last season. And no particular order here, but I really do want to start with Kenny Clark, because you go back and watch Kenny Clark. Remember, played a couple games, got hurt, came back from injury, did not look like himself. He had a plus 1.55 grade. And just quick disclaimer here, you don't need to know a ton about the numbers. Like a 1.0 grade, a plus 1.0 grade is a really good grade, or a really solid grade for any game. A negative 1.0 would be bad. Obviously anything above that or below that, going to be very impressive or not great. But I don't want to get into too much of the minutia of the actual grades, but just to kind of give you an idea, Kenny Clark plus 1.55 going in basically towards the latter part of the season. Then in his last 6 weeks puts up a plus 8.25 grade. Like, you could see the moment he got healthy, because he just started wrecking offenses again and offensive lines, and had a plus 1.95 grade in the NFC Championship game. One of the very few players on the roster who had a really nice NFC Championship game. So Kenny Clark, while through the season, up until those last 6 weeks, looked, frankly, like it was probably the worst he had played since his rookie season. And a lot, again, injuries had a lot to do with that. You could see when he got healthy, everything was perfect, almost near perfect from there on out, and he played fantastic football. So that obviously gives you a ton of confidence that, again, prior to that point, it was likely just he was banged up and not himself. And once he got healthy, he was able to do all the things that we've seen out of Kenny Clark year after year after year with the consistency that he's been able to provide. So great end of the season last year for Clark. Hopefully that's something he can continue in 2021. Next up on my list, Rashawn Gary. Going into the final 4 games of the season, Rashawn Gary actually had a very, very, very slight negative grade, which basically ended up as a neutral grade. Did some really nice things, some other plays that he would like to have back. Being a neutral level player is not a bad thing, right? If you're going out and you're helping your team, not hurting your team, and giving snaps without, the other team gaining an advantage, there's a ton of value there. But I think you, me, the Packers, Rashawn Gary would all like to see him take that step into being not just a neutral player who can go out and maybe help your team by playing snaps without hurting you, but being a guy who can make an impact on the game. Last 4 games and last four games of the season, I should say, plus 3.35. So not quite that 1.0 average over the last 4 games, but not far off of it. And he looked a lot better, and you could see everything starting to come together a little bit more. And I think the big thing with Rashawn Gary is, he would try to do so much speed stuff to the outside, maybe bend, that's not who he is. He's got some good speed, but the more he can convert speed to power and start using technique and start going through players and ripping through, that's what we started to see towards the end of last season with Rashawn Gary. He started setting the edge much better as a run defender. So all of these things, again, are hopefully things that he can carry over into this upcoming season. And that's why a lot of people are very bullish on what Rashawn Gary can become, obviously for a variety of reasons, high draft pick and, all the intangibles and tools, insanely hard worker, but really started to show the consistency in the last 4 weeks of last season. Again, if he can get that going this year consistently throughout the course of a season, you're going to see a much different defense because he's going to bring a whole new level of play to the Packers defense and hopefully garnering more pressures, stopping more runs, because that's the type of player he has the ability to become. Number 3 on my list is definitely cheating a little bit here, and that's Jaire Alexander. Listen, Jaire was phenomenal throughout the season, but last 7 weeks of the season, plus 8.2 grade, he was fantastic. And I think the big thing here is just no off games. He was good every single game through those last 7 weeks. So while we've come to expect that from Jaire Alexander, he was just another player who finished very strong. And that's when you started to say okay, we're talking all pro level now. We're talking about one of the best, if not the best corner in the league level. When you're getting to a point it is so hard to get really good grades as a corner because ultimately through the course of a game, you're going to give up some completions. You're going to give up some yards unless you've got big interceptions, which Jaire generally doesn't have. It's really tough to have positive grades. So it just means you have to be a consistent tackler, that you're shutting the opposing corners down consistently. And that's exactly what we saw out of Jaire. And that's why he started getting that buzz as being one of the best of the best of the best corners in this league, because he's not only flashing it, right? He's doing it week after week. So I think that was the really cool thing about Jaire is we've all seen the talent from day one with Jaire. Now to be able to streak those things together and not have off days and even almost off moments, it's been super impressive. Next up on my list might be a little bit surprising, but it's Dominique Dafney. Now, a very small sample size here, but in the final 3 games, Dafney scored a plus 1.05. Anything major to write home about? No. But with him coming back from practice today, I think it's worth noting here that when Dominique Dafney got on the field, you have to realize in minimum snaps, it's tough to put up those type of really good grades just because you're not out there very often. And one really bad play can just completely tank you. And when I've been saying this offseason that Dominique Dafney, when he got in last year, looked like a rosterable player, this is what I talk about. When I say that, I mean, looks like he could be one of the players on your 53-man that's active on game days. He looked the part last season. I'm not saying Dominique Dafney is going to be, one of your top 20, 25 players, at least not at this point, but I am saying I think he has a role on this team if he can make it and he can show the consistency that he had from a season ago towards the end of last year. So H-back, fullback, special teams, Daphne has the ability to do all that. But again, he needed to get healthy, which he now is. Jaire Alexander is there as well. Wouldn't shock me if they kept both. They are a little bit redundant, but Matt LaFleur likes to be very creative on offense. And if if Daphne can show that he can be a real strong special teams contributor, that's going to be even a better opportunity for him to make the roster. Dean Lowry, negative 4.2 grade going into the last 5 games of the season. In his last 5 games, plus 2.15. That's a significant difference. And, listen, Dean Lowry was not great last year. I'm not breaking any news there. He's still graded in the negative for the season and was one of my lowest graded players. But there is a huge difference between a Dean Lowry that through 12, 13 games plays negative 4.2 football, and a Dean Lowry that for the final 5 games plays plus 2.15 football. And we started seeing the defense be a little bit better, especially against the run towards the end of last season. And Dean Lowry playing at a more consistent level really helped with that. So we need to see more of that Dean Lowry, the same one that we saw at the end of last season. And frankly, that last 5 games probably saved him his job in Green Bay because Green Bay had an out in his contract that they could have let him go. I think his stronger play towards the end of the season really saved him. And again, hopefully just another player who can carry that over this upcoming season. Chris Barnes, maybe not to a large extent, but going into week 15, he had a completely even grade. So again, complete neutral grade, some good, some bad, some inconsistencies, right? But finished his last 5 games with a plus 1.5 grade. And again, anything major there? No, it's not a monster grade, but what you saw from Chris Barnes was a little bit more consistency. And I thought really the defense was in a much better position when Barnes took over as the true inside linebacker, and they weren't subbing guys out at that spot and things like that. And I just think that if Chris Barnes can carry that over and be that consistent player, Green Bay has the players on defense. If you can have a Chris Barnes put up positive numbers as your starting inside linebacker, that would be a huge plus for this team. We've seen some poor tackling at linebacker. We've seen some poor angles, guys not being able to get sideline to sideline. Chris Barnes showed that he has the ability to do some of this stuff. And again, I thought the defense was better with him. And I think going forward, if this is what Chris Barnes can be, what he showed towards the end of last year, that would be a really big step in the right direction for the linebacking core, as well as this defense as a whole. And then lastly, MVS. We know MVS's ups and downs and some of the struggles that he had. He also had a lot of bright spots. Last 2 weeks of the season, plus 1.85 grade. Really looked like he was coming around and playing some of the best football of his career. I've mentioned this before, but if Aaron Rodgers hits MVS in stride on a couple more of those deep balls, we may very well be talking about how MVS saved the Packers in the NFC Championship game and was the reason they went to the Super Bowl. He had the big touchdown, and then he had a couple other plays where he gained separation and had a step, and Rodgers and him just barely missed. And if Rodgers hits him in stride on a couple of those, man, we could have a lot different feel about that game, maybe a lot different offseason, and certainly feel a lot different about MVS. He put a really nice last 2 weeks together last season. And again, a player that I'm hopeful for that can really carry that over and be a more impact player this upcoming season in a contract year in 2021. 4 other players as honorable mention here: Aaron Rodgers, Davante Adams, Robert Tonyan, and Mercedes Lewis. All of them played very well towards the end of the year, but it was all basically the exact same type of play that they had at the beginning of the year, the middle of the year. All 4 were just very consistent players from beginning, middle to end of the season. So yes, all 4 finished strong, but they began strong. They continued strong, they finished strong. So not much of a difference there, but all 4 of them definitely worth noting as well that they finished strong. So again, recapping here quickly, the players that finished strong last year, at least according to my grades: Kenny Clark, Rashawn Gary, Jaire Alexander, Dominique Daphne, Dean Lowry, Chris Barnes, MVS, Aaron Rodgers, Davante Adams, Robert Tonyan, and Mercedes Lewis. That's going to do it for me today. Thank you so much for joining me. I greatly appreciate it. Make sure to subscribe if you have not already. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.